All right, let's head out to that studio in the sky and join Joe Sinnott of Witting Partners and the host of the Energy Detox podcast. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing all right, Jason. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. I'm here in the state of Minnesota and just 20 minutes away from the triangle of North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota borders touching each other. Instead of the four corners, I got the three triangles over there. I guess I trying to get some momentum going on that. So before we get into the mental health aspects of the professional world, anything new in your world? I understand you're going to be going to a family trip. Anything you want to disclose on that? It sounded like it was kind of a fun time.
Disclose. Well, it's not the whole family. I guess that's the first thing. We're leaving a good chunk of the family behind, but my son and I are headed off to Italy here in a couple of weeks to cap off the busyness of May. It seems like May is the month of everything from a personal standpoint, at least. Graduations and recitals and shows and all kinds of fun stuff. But yeah, we'll be capping that off here and heading to Europe.
Is this an ancestry journey, or is this just a Italy sounds fun to me type of a thing?
A couple different elements fueling it. One is somewhat, I guess, ancestral, that being that my children and I actually received our dual citizenship, our Italian citizenship, a couple of years ago. So this is one way to kind of take advantage of that, if you will. I mean, there's really no practical benefits, but we do have Italian passports. I will note my wife, she's not eligible yet. We'd actually have to go live in Italy for, I think, about a decade for that to happen. But so yeah, this is a little bit of a nod to ancestry and my half Italian ancestry. But more significantly, it's that my son, he's finishing up eighth grade. He's actually all into Latin. It's his favorite subject, and just received the sacrament of confirmation. So, and chose Saint Jerome, who is the person who translated the Bible into Latin. So, all kinds of fun connections there that bring us to Rome, and we look forward to all of those converging here for a couple days in a few weeks.
If I was into clicks and numbers and that sort of thing, quantity over quality, if you will, I'd go down the how to get the dual citizenship route here on this interview because, with today's climate, so many people are wanting to leave the country and come into the country. Dual citizenship seems to be the hot topic, but we're going to talk about mental health today, some important things as opposed to just, the salacious let's get the clickbait going, which is part of mental health, by the way. That was my transition there, Joe. I was they're not all award winners, but we try our best here. And you've got a program for your executive coaching business, Witting Partners. You've kind of loosely rolled out or professionally rolled out. I guess I'm more or less curious on this program that you have for mental health and in the professional place because you're ahead of your time because now it's finally catching on and people are starting to. I'm starting to see that more companies are really embracing it over the last year or two, that sort of thing. So, talk to me a little bit about the professional side of mental health.
Yeah, well, I guess probably the first thing to say, Jason, by way of disclaimer, is that, as we talk about mental health, I am not, I don't think you are, a formal mental health practitioner, not a therapist. There are certainly resources out there that is what they do. And I am not one of those. And, need to be very clear with anybody that I work. And, and certainly it's in all of my legalese and documents and everything else for any lawyers out there that, look, when it comes to mental health, there are resources that, if needed, you should turn to. Not a coach, not an engineer necessarily. But that being said, the same leadership development framework, Jason, that I use for all of my coaching and my speaking and all of the engagement that I have, it does have very natural tie-ins to mental health matters. And in particular, helping leaders identify those things that could contribute to mental health issues. So again, it is not in and of itself a mental health program, but it is essentially a building upon, if you will, the same five-part energy-focused approach that I take with everything. Because quite frankly, Jason, mental health issues come up all the time. And again, even though as a coach, my job is to listen and direct people to the resources that they need. Again, whether it's a formal mental health resource, The reality is day to day, there's so many things that fuel, some of these matters, whether it's overwhelm, toxicity, uncertainty, confusion, inability to make decisions, feeling stuck, all of those things, you know, they're connected to mental health, again, formally or informally. So certainly we can dive into what that looks like. But again, I do want to be very clear from the outset here that, especially for anybody listening that feels like they do need that measure of support and true therapy, you're not going to get it from me. I don't think you're going to get it from the two of us in this conversation, Jason.
No, but what you're going to get is you're going to get some people with experience. You're going to get some people that have probably some empathy as opposed to maybe sympathy. And on the flip side, some areas you'll get sympathy and not empathy, because empathy, of course, you pretty much have had to live through it to understand it, to be able to connect with it. Sympathy, you're trying your best and you're just, hoping that you can, really connect, but you at least understand that somebody's in pain. See, I'm not a professional. I dumb it down. You know what I mean? That's kind of the definitions of the two different things. But I look at this where, I'm a communications background. I'm educated with a double major in college. Both are in communications. One is in speech communications. The other one is in mass communications. And it doesn't, so we've done everything from political writing to, news writing to individual writing to persuasion, all kinds of different things. And essentially what we're talking about is communication and information. And that is what mental health breaks down to, is how effectively you're communicating with someone and how relevant is the information to your life. And so this is where it becomes really difficult. And that's why the disclaimer is very important up front that no, we're not professionals. So if you're expecting a professional, you ain't going to get it here. You might find some things you agree with, and that's good. But at the best, we're like an old roadmap, because we know the formula, we know the template, but if we're going down the river with Lewis and Clark, there might be a tree down. So now we're going to need a professional. If we're going up the Himalayas, there might be an avalanche not on our map, so we need a Sherpa. There is a time when a professional is needed. How am I doing, Joe? That's not too bad. This is all click clack, spur of the moment here type stuff. But in reality, I'm a Libra, and so when I get done going back and forth with things, no matter what it is, there's always a core, there's always a root, there's always a formula. And with mental health, to me, it just seemed like information and communication is at the core of it. What's your thoughts on that?
It is, yeah, you are spot on. And, with communications degrees, again, not formal mental health, but I mean, so much of helping people through whatever whatever's in front of them, whether it's struggles or whether they're actually on cloud nine and they're doing really well, it all starts with listening, right? And that's probably the most cliche thing that you could offer up when it comes to communication and decision making and all of those is, hey, the importance of slowing down and listening to the facts, listening to what's being said instead of jumping in and trying to solve a problem. Well, when we're talking mental health, that rule still holds, right? Stopping, listening, creating space, that's valuable in any circumstance. In any circumstance, whether things are going well, whether things are going poorly, again, whether somebody's really struggling with something and they really do need that support, the worst thing you could do is jump in and feel like, well, I got to try to solve their problem. Ooh, I think this is what I heard. I'm gonna, jump right in and tell them where they need to go and what they need to do. That typically adds noise. It adds stress. It adds anxiety. And it happens all the time in corporate environments. And again, I think it happens all the time in personal lives, right? Where, you talked about sympathy versus empathy. Well, we might be wired to want to help, right? Oh, I'm sympathetic to that person's situation. I'm going to jump in and I'm going to tell them everything that I know and that they need to know. Guess what? It starts with listening. So, Jason, you are spot on. And I think that's, kind of tying to, again, the framework that I referenced. That's the first part. It's understanding what the other person is actually after. When we talk about, mental health and wellness, or again, as I like to frame it, right? It's wellness workover, right? Nice ties to oil and gas, but it's the same thing. Before we jump in to fix a well to get it flowing, take a step back and actually understand, all right, well, what does success look like? What are the issues? What is the data? What's been done before? It's so easy to skip those things because you've got a solution instead of asking a couple questions and shutting up and listening and saying, all right, well, What are we after here? What would be nice? What are you seeking? That's that exploration phase that is so critical instead of jumping into the problem solving phase of so many matters, Jason.
Back when I would do talk radio, I would every now and then I would fill in for the afternoon people, and then I was also a producer for the afternoon show. So we would get a lot of kind of local pothole talk, if you will. Like, hey, we got to fix this pothole, and no, we don't, and basically bar stool shouting radio, if you will, and the one that just was fantastic because the show I produced for, he was a newspaper reporter like me. I came from so they put the two print guys together in the afternoon to do a show, and so bombed. I mean, beyond belief because it was too factual. It wasn't enough sizzle. But I mean, by bombed, I don't mean that, but compared to what we thought it would turn into, yeah. But one of the storylines we did that I never stopped laughing at, still to this day, because it's what we're talking about. There was I don't know, some kind of Twin Cities shared city kerfuffle that the city of Fargo had to pay for. And they wanted the city of Moorhead to pay for some of it too because they were going to benefit from it. And so the city of Moorhead the whole time, and everybody was being passive aggressive. In all these public meetings and all the public officials we'd bring on the radio and in the news, everybody's being passive aggressive. Oh, we support each other, all this different stuff. Everybody's sympathizing with each other, but nobody's empathizing with each other. And all of a sudden, the bill came due, and Moorhead is like, we're not going to financially support you. No, we're going to support you. And here Fargo thought, oh, we're going to bill you like 30% of this or something. Here Fargo had one understanding and Moorhead had another, and all this was like public for months. Of course, me and the other newspaper people are like, oh my God, this is gold. This is just like Keystone Coppers, right? Playing out as a daily radio show type of a thing, and I never forget that because I think a lot of us are like that, where we'll say we're going to do something and the other person's got a completely different understanding of it, Joe. And that's so true. And I see you nodding your head. So take that baton and go with it and put it on the interpersonal level into communications and everything within the workplace because it's really relevant. It very much is.
Yeah, and I don't know that we need to, go any further on that, Jason. It's what you just said. It's getting that understanding, repeating it back to the other person so that you're clear, and then you can dive into the next steps, which again, as I view it, again, we can't just talk, fluffy, acknowledging the industry that I support and working with lots of folks who like to generate results and get stuff done. At some point, you need to go from, okay, we are clear on what we're after. We are clear on some sort of end state. How do we get there? And again, going back to oil and gas, what do? You have a development plan, right? You come up with a rig schedule, a frac schedule. You recognize what resources you have, financial resources and other resources to support operations. And again, you assess those resources and you come up with some sort of strategy. And when it comes to, again, the mental health side of things, again, in my role as coach, not as therapist, but as coach, it's to lay out, okay, well, what are you doing? What are your habits? What are the resources that are at your disposal? And how are you currently using them? Again, a very factual conversation so that I'm not jumping in with some sort of solution, but first understanding, hey, what's already working for people? And more significantly, and this is, again, typically a good chunk of my coaching, what are the things that you're doing that actually isn't adding value? And quite frankly, can be adding anxiety and noise and chaos and, bleeding of energy. That's that development phase. That's when you realize that, hey, you know what? Some of your habits, they might not be working for you. And instead of the temptation to add stuff in, right? Another app, another book, another approach, typically the first thing is to see what can be eliminated or at least optimized, Jason. And in all of that, the one specific example I'll add in this development phase when we're talking about what resources are available is a big question to basically say, hey, what's at your disposal that you might not currently be using? And one thing I find in corporations quite a bit is that there are resources. There's, employee assistance programs, EAPs in many cases that can help that are specific to mental health. These are real practitioners. A lot of employees don't even know they exist. Or, one thing I had one client do that was great. He got up and shared with his folks how he used these resources. He said, hey, he didn't have to do this, but, in transparency, he said, hey, look, period of overwhelm, working through some things. I use these resources that are all confidential, that are at our disposal as employees. That's that development phase. Talking about what you have available, understanding how best to utilize them, and cutting out some of the crap, Jason, that might not be serving you. That's a critical step before, again, going too far down a path and trying to rush to some sort of, solution that is likely not going to be sustainable.
The other element I wanted to bring up here is, I brought up the template and the formula, and you've got a program or an exercise or a workshop with the workplace wellness. And so this story kind of feeds into that a little bit because, you know, have you ever driven on a road on a ridden road? Have you ever flown? We'll just change the word completely. Have you ever flown on one of those puddle jumper planes?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty small and pretty intimate, and if a bird flies by, you might kind of the bird's wind might shake your plane a little bit, that type of thing. So I was in that one day, and the we were going to go do some story or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. And the pilot, he must have been in his 60s. He pulled out this laminated card, and it had the step by step on how to start a plane. And this guy was a 40-year veteran. And I asked him, I'm like, what are you doing here? Is this your first time flying a plane? Smart ass remark. And he looks at me and he goes, no. He goes, but there's a system in place to start a plane. And I don't want to ever be in a situation where I'll forget it because of something that happened an hour ago or last night or whatever the case is. I have a lot of lives that rely on me. And and he did it, and I could tell I was not the first person ever to ask this question. And so he did it in a way that was very, as a matter of fact, but also comforting because he's letting me know that, hey, I take this job very, very serious. We're going to be 5,000 or whatever feet in the air. And, people are going to be concerned in this little puddle jumper, type of a thing. And it got me thinking, what a good strategy, even for a person who doesn't need that. He just doesn't. The guy's a 40-year veteran. I mean, he can do it blindfolded. But he understands we live in a world where optics are part of mental health nowadays. Unfortunately, perception is reality. Talk to me a little bit about that because I think, like somebody like whether it's your workshop or other workshops by companies even introducing the idea that, hey, listen, we're going to talk about mental health in the workplace. Even that alone is kind of like that workplace checklist a little bit. Just your thoughts a little bit on that.
Well, I guess two things. I mean, one, when it comes to pilots, I was just talking with somebody a couple weeks ago. There was a plane that had to be diverted. There was, they heard some ticking and they thought it could have been a bomb, so they had to divert. They had the audio from the pilot, and I think this is standard pilot parlance, but he's referring to, we got 180 souls on board, right? I think that's pretty standard. You mentioned lives, right? So the gravity of what their role is as a pilot, that's pretty straightforward. I think for any of us that have flown on a plane, that yeah, you know what? These people at the front of the plane, they do have our lives in their hands. Unfortunately, with us being so busy and all the pressures that come with, especially, some of these corporate roles, that's easy to forget, Jason. Again, you have these lives, you have these souls. One person that I work with, he likes to reference, the fact that people are trading their lives for work, right? I mean, it's not just, an hour here or two. No, it's a good chunk of their life that they are trading for this particular job. Obviously, to get a return on that and to have the financial support to be able to, lead their family and all of that. But yeah, to slow leaders down and have them recognize the gravity of what they do, even if it's not as straightforward as, say, a pilot, that's crucial, Jason. It's crucial. And then in terms of the optics piece, I wrapped us up, and again, when I'm talking my program and my framework and everything else, typically this is that last phase. This is that downstream phase when I talk about the fact that, look, it does matter how you are perceived. We work, or I work, and the people that I work with are in a commodity business, Jason. And so if you're just seen as a commodity, if the optics are such that, you know what, you're a dime a dozen, you're really no different from anybody else. If you're just seen as a commodity, you're going to be less effective. And then that can play into your mental health, right? Am I really that different? Do I really add that much value? Am I just run of the mill? And again, I was never wired to really lean into, oh, you're so special, you're so unique. But it's funny now from a coaching standpoint, I see that, yeah, yeah, you know what, you are special, you are unique, you do bring differentiated strengths, and that's incredibly valuable for the team that you're working with, the company that you're working for, and for your family that you're supporting. And so, Jason, the minute that people start to devalue themselves and feel like, yeah, you know what, I'm really just one of 1,000 other people like me, that can unfortunately fuel a lot of mental health matters, and that needs to be nipped in the bud right away. So again, from a leadership standpoint, bringing these things together, you think about the gravity of you as a leader. You can't just transactionally listen to what somebody says, try to solve their problem, throw some sort of resource at them. As important as that is, right? Identifying those resources, we just talked about that. But it's also important to look for that nuance where people are really diminishing their value, not just to themselves, but to you. If you are their leader, the minute that they start diminishing their value and potentially looking at even your team as just a commodity, right? As just some run-of-the-mill, drilling team, completions team, engineering team, geoscience team, you immediately start to lose effectiveness. You immediately start to, again, shift the optics, whether you intend to do so or not, which makes you less effective and which, quite frankly, makes your stakeholders start to feed into that same narrative that you're telling yourself, Jason. So, that's how I view it. That's what I see all the time. And hopefully within some of those comments there, it gives some people pause to, ask whether or not the people that they're working with are devaluing themselves and, feeling like they don't have anything to offer that's really different from anybody else.
You mentioned about how, we go to work basically to feed our families, and that's the justification why we live our life this way. Correct? That was kind of the synopsis of it. And what I find interesting about that is, the journey of that was for safety. Was it was safer to go to a place of work than it is to go out in the jungle and fight a lion, to go out and get food that way. And so there's this phrase called flight or fight. And that was traced back, to the days when we would basically be jungle dwellers competing and hiding from lions and tigers and bears and that kind of thing. And when you're scared like that, it jars your system in a way that mental health experts have created a whole industry out of. So it's a very real thing. Shell shock, for example, in the military, now it's called PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And I lost track of the acronyms. Battlefield fatigue, it was called. It's changed like 7-8 times in my lifetime, so I apologize if I said the wrong one. But it's interesting how much that's creeped into the workplace, and it's not. And I'm talking a white collar workplace. I'm not talking about like on the well site. That's actually probably more laid back than a lot of the offices nowadays, because the well sites have gotten so freaking safe that you don't have guys slinging chains like the old days where, one guy a month might lose a limb or something like that. And, and nowadays the safety mechanisms have gotten so good, the guys out in the field have probably got less stress than the ones in the office, because a deadline and office culture has so much to do with your flight or flight. And I worked in the newspaper industry where deadlines meant you would go out of business if you didn't meet it. So there was a lot of stress behind a deadline. In the radio business, dead air would give a person a heart attack, because it would send a whole signal of wave of people getting involved, of decision-making ability to make your life hell and this and that. And so over time, it's just interesting how much the office has evolved to where human resources departments now have to have conventions and programs and you got to spend some time understanding the mental health, because I truly believe that flight or flight from the tiger days has evolved into the white collar C-suite executive office place for a variety of reasons. Because Joe, at the end of the day, we're just trying to feed our families. And so, anyways, go ahead and tell me I'm crazy, or tell me I hit on a couple points or something like that, I guess.
Well, I'll tell you that you're spot on when you say that there's a lot of folks who have primarily an office job who would much rather spend their time out in the field or perhaps in a literal jungle than in a corporate setting. And so you're spot on there. But in terms of, again, bringing it back to what leaders can do on a daily basis to help people who are overwhelmed by, desires to fight or run away or whatever. And it's to, we've been talking about this already, Jason, but slow down and say, all right, well, so what? Let's talk practically through the reactions that, you could have, through the actions that you can take. And ideally, you're doing that proactively, right? Ideally, you're saying, hey, look, you're faced with perhaps missing this deadline or not being able to get this done to the level that you want or that the powers that be want. So what? What are the practical implications of you going down path A or B? What are the practical implications of you being raked over the coals or being chewed apart by a lion or whatever? Slowing people down in a very objective manner. Again, that's what I do. And again, this is not therapy. This is in many ways, from a project management standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, saying, okay, things happen all the time. Let's talk through contingencies. Let's talk through mitigation measures. And again, Jason, I mean, I'm talking at a high level here, but that's so critical. But most people don't, they don't have the headspace. They don't have the bandwidth to slow down and think. From a coaching standpoint, and I'm sure any coach out there hears the same thing that I do, which is, Joe, one of the things I like, working on with you is, just creating that time to think. One of the benefits of meeting one-on-one, having something on the calendar in particular, is giving that individual who is stressed out, overwhelmed, feeling like, again, they're navigating a jungle, the opportunity to slow down and think. And so my job as a coach, and I would argue the job of any leader out there, is to look for and create that time to say, so what? So what if this goes south? So what if this person quits? So what if this vendor, drops the ball? You're going to have to react, right? You will react. Why don't we talk through it now ahead of time proactively so that you can lower the temperature, think more clearly, be prepared, instead of allowing yourself to just kind of swirl in this overwhelm and anxiety and worry of all the things that could go on. So, hopefully, Jason, that again, that gives you some flavor, some color of what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is dealing with either real things that have happened and people are in the middle of, or dealing with hypotheticals so that they are ready when the time comes to confidently take a breath and say, hey, you know what? I've talked through this scenario, and here's option A, B, and C that I think we can deploy if necessary.
A lot of times, too, it's hard for business owners because whether they do it by design or they do it by just the evolution of the roles, they get surrounded by yes people and people that don't challenge them. And so one of the things that is very healthy for businesses is to have somebody brought in from the outside to challenge just the thought process and have these work exercises that you're talking about, because to be able to flesh something out in a way that you cannot do with people that are paid to not do that. Essentially, their job is to keep the focus on what the plan is, not start speculating about new plans. And so that to me is one of those things that's lost in a lot of businesses, that there's value there, a lot like, and that's more of preventing a downward spiral mental health aspect that I'm talking about. And I'll give you an example of something similar to that is, his name is Thomas Brewer out of Oklahoma City. and he does like disaster mental health assistance, to where if there's like a death or an accident on a well site, and he said that the main the main role of his job, he's got all the workshops and everything you need, but he doesn't force it on anybody. He just kind of goes by everybody's pace on things. And he said the first year he documented his time, and most of it was just sitting there in silence or playing cards with people, because they didn't know how to react with watching their coworker die or get in an accident or have some sort of catastrophic event happen on their well site. And so my point is that the professionals are great, but there's other professionals out there that are skilled in other areas, like yourself and Thomas Brewer, to where that's the valuable about the customization part that is needed in a lot of businesses, especially because, listen, mental health is individual, and even the best professionals only is just an updated roadmap. That's all it is, and then they go through and they customize your map session by session. But for the most part, anybody who's out there spouting advice like you or I, this is basic, basic guidance, if you will. I see where that can be really valuable, like in the same way Thomas Brewer just allows the organic nature to happen in an office environment, fleshing something out, or just, hey, let's do this for fun, not to get mad. Let's just see what happens if we go down this path. And if there's a dead end, we're just going to, turn around and go back down the other one, but we're not going to get upset. Nobody's going to yell. You know what I mean? Like that. And sometimes those parameters, they do have to be set up front. Otherwise, people will get upset that they're wasting time or something along those lines. And anyway, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on that point, because as a business owner, I find it very useful in a way that you can monetize, that having these kind of these I don't know, fleshing sessions, or just spitball sessions, if you will, about how to connect the dots, how to devil in the detail of certain things. Because a lot of times it's all it is. It's just a few cracks in the dam that you got to fix before they get too big, and you get too overwhelmed because you start thinking of the bigger picture when you got to focus. Anyway, so I'm not here to do a commercial for you or do your job or anything like that, but I just wanted to point out that these things are really, really useful. And what are you finding from people when you deal with them? What is their biggest issue in the workplace from a mental health standpoint?
Other than their manager, Jason.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
The silent partner is not silent. Sorry.
I mean, and again, you can lean on my data, my anecdotes, but I think there's no shortage of articles and studies out there that, what dictates a person's engagement and satisfaction and morale at a company is driven, 80+% by the person that he or she is working for. And so, so much of the frustration, so much of the anxiety flows from the direct boss. I mean, that's universal. I see it. I'm sure you've seen it, Jason. But in terms of, all right, well, okay, so fine. Like, what do you do about it? And one thing you said, and I don't think it was, necessarily where you were going, but you mentioned parameters, right? You mentioned, hey, you need to operate within some sort of parameters. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I find works well for people who, again, are overwhelmed, are frustrated, or, we can use much stronger language than that. But, some people that say, look, Joe, I don't think this person's ever going to change, or like, what do I do? One of the things I say is, okay, let's assume that this person or this scenario or this policy or procedure or whatever isn't going to change. If you knew that there was no hope of changing this structure, this person's approach, this company policy or philosophy or goal or whatever, what would you do? And that question right there, or that type of question, again, it's fun because it shifts from this anxiety and in many cases this false hope that, hey, maybe we can change some things, to say, all right, well, here's a barrier in front of me. Again, how am I going to go around it? How am I going to mitigate it? It's a relief sometimes. And again, we talk about sort of mental health here, but in terms of physical wellness, it's a relief sometimes to get a diagnosis that's clear. Even if it stinks, it's nice to know what's wrong with you, right? Because now you can come up with a plan, you can attack things, and you almost reduce that anxiety when you finally find out, again, what's wrong with you, what's causing some of these issues. It's no different when people are frustrated to, again, they might know what the issue is, but to basically, and again, this is the difference between me and a true mental health professional, accept it and say, look, you know what? If this is immovable, I'm creative, right? I work in the energy industry. My whole job is fighting fires and finding ways to, get around things and be creative and still reach our end destination. You could do the same darn thing if you almost concede, wave the white flag and say, all right, well, these are parameters that I need to work with and somehow get around, Jason. So, that is one thing that I have found to be incredibly helpful and almost, brings a smile to people's faces because it's like now it's like, again, I hate to lean on cliches, but it's, hey, control what you can. Yeah. All right. What do I have the power to change? I'm not going to change any of these things. You know what? You're right, Joe. I'm not going to change them. Joe, you're not going to change them. So what can I do to move forward? That's incredibly impactful, Jason. And I encourage that for any individual out there, but I also encourage it for any leader out there who's dealing with a frustrated employee who might be frustrated with a colleague, with another team, with another department that, again, neither the leader or that individual employee has direct influence or control over.
So how does somebody engage in this then? You mentioned you've got, you did the workforce well. What's it? The what?
The
Workforce
wellness
rollover?
workover, a nice
Wellness
play on
workover.
well workovers that again are a key part of our industry.
Yeah. So, that's like is a program or a workshop or something like that. So, companies are doing more and more of that. Talk to me a little bit about how companies can do that. I mean, I don't know if you're still offering yours or if it's just something you did in the past, and it's kind of, yeah, you'll dust it off if need be, type of a thing. But there are more and more companies now getting involved with openly assisting with mental health and giving different options and that sort of thing. So, are you still doing it? And talk to me a little bit about that.
So I am very much still doing it, but all of the times that I deploy this wellness workover framework, it's in the context of an ongoing relationship with a company. So again, we're focused on different things, say, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, whatever the cadence is for that particular company, to the extent we're doing group workshops, group coaching, group training, and this wellness piece, this, call it mental health, in some cases physical health, but whatever wellness is to you, again, that just fits within the existing framework that is used to talk specifically about communication, decision making, delegation, executive presence. So, think of it as a module that's part of a bigger program, as opposed to something that I'm out there offering just as the wellness workover, just as a standalone mental health, supplement, not primary, but supplemental mental health approach for leaders and the people that they support. So yeah, very much a part of what I do, but not something that I'm out there doing as a standalone exercise. Because quite frankly, Jason, again, play to my strengths. This mental health piece, it makes a lot more sense for people to digest when it is part of something bigger. For those who again don't, really aren't looking for, hey, I need mental health support. I need a therapist. Because when that's the case, they need to find those dedicated resources who have a whole different set of tools and background and education and experience that, again, Jason, I do not possess. I will not claim to
Hmm.
possess. So
There's a
totally
fine
appreciate
line
the
in this
question.
too, because you were very quick to point out that you're not a professional, and the reason you did that is because you didn't want to give anybody the wrong idea that you can help them, or that you're here to offer them some kind of assistance that they might be looking for that you can't give them. And you didn't want to mislead them, is what I'm talking about. And when you're talking about mental health, I grew up with a father who was an alcoholic, and so I'm very aware of alcohol, AA. In fact, I went to Alateen as a kid, and so for me, when I see somebody using alcoholism as a way to profit, it stands out to me because of, you're not supposed to. It's supposed to be anonymous. So why are you out just, keynoting speeches on your addiction type of, you're using AA, people in AA don't like that. Like Brad Pitt got in a lot of trouble for that. He tried to go do alcohol awareness, and the AA people got very upset because I don't care if you're Brad Pitt, it's anonymous, man. And so there's that vein of it. And even the other day, I saw somebody was commenting on a mental health walk. Great idea, right, Joe? Mental health walk put on by some local group. Well, they had on there, sponsored by this corporation, free swag, and celebrities included. Of course, the comments are, okay, so this mental health walk's not about image shaming. So you don't even know who the celebrities are. You're just letting people know there will be celebrities. Okay. And the swag, you're letting people know that if they come, the first 100 people that show up get something, but the next people don't because the sponsors ran out of money. And by the way, good for the comments. Good for those people calling out those leaders by saying, no, I'm not going to give you a free pass to take free money and benefit off of mental health. So that part's a little bit tricky. And so I just wanted to point out that there are people out there abusing mental health in a way to personally profit or personally increase their brand or their business. And people like you are being very upfront to almost overcorrect to where it's almost nauseating. Like, come on, man. It's, people know you're not a professional. It's okay. But you understand my point is that, there are people out there. So I think it's good to be like you and overcorrect and like myself and say, listen, we're not professionals. Go get one if you need one. But at the same time, keep in mind, there are some professional groups that are using it in a way that they're trying to benefit off it. So anyway, I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. And you don't have to comment on that because that's triggering and political. But at the same time, I thought it was kind of comical. I saw that the other day. It was from my local community. And it wasn't a pot that I was stirring. So I was very much happy about that because back in the radio days, they wanted us to stir the pot all the time, and we didn't want to do that. But so what's next, man? Are you you're going to Italy and then you're coming back, and you got any summer speaking engagements or anything like that you want to mention?
Nothing public out there that I can or will mention. Full summer of activities and engagements after I get back, which is good and bad. Depends on your perspective, I suppose. But yeah, it'll be a busy summer after I return. But yeah, nothing out there other than the occasional SPE Tech Talk. I think some of those are out there, so those are public there. Live broadcast, moderating some conversations with different technology providers there via the Society of Petroleum Engineers. So I think I do have a couple of those on the docket, but I'm pretty sure that's it for public-facing engagements here.
Is there much out on the East Coast there? Is there much for oil and gas events during the summer? I know there is at the end of the year and in the first part of first quarter, like I think that's in February or something like that, is March maybe the big one. But is there much out there in the summer outside of, just industry mixers and that sort of thing?
No, nothing big. I mean, the biggest thing in this part of the world that'll be coming up is at the end of summer, I guess formally just before summer ends from a calendar standpoint, and that is Shale Insight up in Erie. So that's put on by the Marcellus Shale Coalition. That's in mid-September each year, 2 or 3 days. So again, I think formally before whatever it is, September 20th or 21st there when summer ends. But no, that's the next big one, at least on my radar. Like you said, there's lots of smaller things. Certainly, in this day and age with AI and data centers, there's no shortage of those. I feel like on a weekly basis, Jason.
Yeah.
But in terms of some of the more traditional, especially oil and gas centered events, no, nothing on my radar here for the next couple months.
Well, even like a few of the industry people I talk to, that their job is to go to these events full time. You know what I mean? And that's during the summer. They're at state fairs. They're at ball games. You know what I mean? They're at someone's oil and gas night at the minor league ballpark, and State Fair this week, and it's almost like they don't actually do any oil and gas events during the summer because they're so busy at the
Yeah.
the community events and trying to reach the masses at that type of thing. So awesome. Well, fantastic. We'll have to circle back then. Oh, let's see. I'm going to be doing a lot of reruns this summer, so you'll be seeing old interviews from ourselves being aired all summer long as we kind of take the Route 66 as I kind of do that a little bit. And mental health, of course, is going to be a big part of my journey this summer along Route 66. So we'll might have to check in from the road from time to time. We'll see how it goes. But wish you luck and travel safe over in Italy, Joe.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jason. Always a pleasure connecting with you here.